All right, Dr. Winters, thank you so much for joining me on the Spine Nerve podcast. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
So, obviously, I just kind of read you in and let everybody know who you are. But in your words, at this point in your career, what is your job?
Yeah, all right. And this is funny, right? I think never thought I would be doing what I'm doing. So part of my time is an emergency physician, and so over the weekend I'm in the ED and I'm seeing patients, and so that's half my time. And then the other half is split amongst different things. And so I'm chair of finance. We have 21 emergency departments, so I oversee the finance for that. And then I'm the director for leadership development for the Mayo Clinic Care Network. And so I develop a lot of leaders within our partners and then also internally. I'm an executive coach and coach many of our chairs. And so all those things kind of come together in weird ways. And then also author of a book and do a lot of writing.
It's a whole mouthful of
Yeah,
titles that you occupy at this point.
yeah, it's I wandered into all of it. None of it was planned.
No, it's a beautiful thing. I read your book. So for everybody who's listening, you're the leader now, or you're the leader, comma now what,
Right.
which I thought was absolutely fantastic. And I've heard you on a couple of podcasts, and so I felt like it would be really topical to bring you on to our podcast. Our listenership is a lot of kind of earlier career folks, right? Residents, fellows, probably first 5 years of practicing. And I think there's a lot of people that are stepping into that role of leadership,
Sweet.
within their practices, within their communities, and trying to figure out how to take that next step in evolution. And
Totally.
so you're obviously working at a institution that is world renowned in terms of developing both physicians as well as leaders. I'm sure you get a lot of exposure to residents and to fellows. How do you normally kind of start the conversation when they're asking you about leadership and how you can start to build those skills as a young physician who's
Yeah.
still, frankly, trying to find your way of being a physician?
Yeah, so I think I break it into a couple things. So one is like we're leaders at all levels, right? And so as we're taking care of patients, we're oftentimes leading teams. And so we have a nurse and we're talking with family members. And I think from that perspective, if we think about ourselves as leaders and how we can be more effective at doing that, that's one thing that I think is natural for all of us. And then there are kind of more formal leadership roles. And so those are things where you start to be involved with committees, in charge of projects, and then as you move on, having direct oversight of individuals and strategy and those sorts of things. And so I think it depends on each of those niches. Within all of those, it's, I think, easy to think about stuff in terms of, so number one, how do we lead in one-to-one scenarios? And so as we're having conversations with our colleagues, with family members, with patients, those sorts of things, how are we doing and can we improve our ability to be effective at those one-to-one communications? And as you get more in terms of formal leadership, that becomes like as you're supervising individuals, how you're having those conversations, as you're dealing with some of the difficult and disruptive stuff, how do you deal with that? And so then the second thing is how do we lead teams? And so whether that's a small team and I'm in the ED and I've got a group of people, or whether that is a CEO who's overseeing, an organization or someone who's in charge of, let's say, a department chair or an APD who's trying to help change some things. How do we help individuals who all disagree come up with some idea of how to move forward? And then I think the third thing is how do we like lead ourselves? Because all along this like throughout our lives. We do these things, then all of a sudden we're in these situations which are uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and so how do we encounter those things? And as we think about how we think probably now, and we pair that with how we thought maybe 5 years ago, we can see there's a big difference. Like there's just more, the way we make sense of things is from a probably a deeper perspective. And so that how do we get better at understanding ourselves and what our needs are the three areas.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. You brought up, the three areas of leading, you know, small teams, larger teams, or ourselves. One of the things that you've written and talked about is, being able to overplay your expertise.
Mm,
And I mean, I think particularly, I think as a young physician, right, you've spent all of this time acquiring knowledge and working on becoming, the expert, right? You're finishing fellowship, you're like, I am double board certified, I'm everything.
Yeah,
I've got it all. I've got it all figured out. How do you go about helping those younger physicians to understand, and like you said, what you're going to understand in 5 years, but how do you kind of guide them along that journey of not overplaying their expertise, or understanding even what that means of
sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that the funny thing there is like as we think about I don't know, the faculty members and their committees, like they're all not coming from this expert perspective. I mean, this is not something that's just for like just post training. It's over expertise is overplayed by CEOs and people on boards of organizations just as well as any of us. And so what I mean by that is, and so I think, geez, the easy thing to do is I think about the kinds of decisions that we make, and there's a framework called the Cynefin framework, Cynefin, and that was David Snowden in Harvard Business Review. That really kind of, I think it helps me think about when we use our expertise and when we need to reach out and kind of put our expertise down and think about things from a different perspective. And so there are decisions that we make where things are common sense, easy stuff, we all agree, there's best practices, we move on. There are decisions that we make where it requires our expertise. And so when you're doing a block, like you have expertise in how to do that block, and there are individuals who call you for that expertise. And so it's a very natural thing. We know that, like, as an emergency physician, I get someone who comes in with an MI, I'm not going to call the orthopedist. They're going to be like, what are you doing? And so there's that expert stuff I think we're fairly comfortable with. And that's really, our careers are started, built based on our expertise. And then, so these are all things where we kind of all agree on what's needed and what's going to happen based on what's going on. And so we agree that if someone's having an MI, there's the cardiologist, they're going to do whatever they're going to do, and that the patient's going to get better from that. Like there's defined inputs and outputs, and we agree that there's a high probability that things are going to happen. Okay, but then there's the other stuff, and that's oftentimes the stuff that we're talking about when we're in this kind of leadership realm, which is the space of unknowns, where, okay, let's start talking about schedules. Let's start talking about process. Let's start talking about what's going on in the competition. Let's start talking about regulatory stuff. These are all things where there's a lot of unknowns there, and we're trying to like figure out like how we kind of go through this ever-changing environment. In that environment, if we act like we're the expert, then we may have the answer. I mean, and I bet you can sit in a meeting and you're gonna be like, I know what to do. I don't know what they're talking about. Like that's where we're coming from, our expertise. Maybe, but maybe there's a whole bunch of other things we need to be considering. And so I think that is a big step for us as we're entering kind of leadership roles, which is when do we invoke our expertise, like this is something I know, and when do we need to step back and not and like understand that we have a perspective, but our perspective also contains our own blind spots, and it's kind of it's in a small area. And so how do we step into not as much the role of the expert, but that of a facilitator or a coach, where we're going to try to help groups see big possibilities and what's going on, the agreements and disagreements, and then from that figure out how to move forward. And understanding that as we're moving forward in those sorts of environments, there isn't a right way, there isn't a wrong way. There's just us trying to poke the environment based on what we think, given what we've kind of come up with.
Mhm. Now, I mean, I think there's, obviously that takes a lot of personal insight and understanding of kind of where you are in the space that you're trying to grow in. How do you go about, so from your position where you're a coach and helping people to develop these skills, how do you start to have that conversation? I mean, let's say you have, somebody who's coming into a leadership role, and they come from years and years of expertise and being tremendous at their craft or working their way through, and they're starting, they're coming up and they're not realizing that they have blind spots, right? I mean, they are the expert, and we're trying to figure out how to integrate them with the other leaders. How do you start that conversation as the coach that's kind of facilitating that?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the situation. So in some situations, people are like, you know what, I'm not really that good at delegating, and so I need to develop this, or I have this issue, we're wanting to expand this or do that, and I'm not really sure how to approach this. And there's this awareness that this is like a new area, and so that is a challenge that is for them, and they understand that this is kind of a complex thing, and so then that may be one thing. Sometimes what happens is people get into situations where like, you know what, I did this, and then now the department's mad at me, and so I don't know what to do now. Or they get some feedback from individuals where things aren't working out so well. Generally, it's some combination of those sorts of things, and a lot of it boils down to, for all of us, we all have, there's things that we're good at, and there's things that are challenging for us.
Mhm.
And in the coaching practice, a lot of it boils down to very common things like some people are very confident and maybe speak up too much, and they find themselves dominating conversations and invoking their expertise too much. Some people feel more kind of resistant, or not wanting to speak up so much. They tend to be quiet, and then that way they're kind of holding back. Some people aren't good at delegating. Some people, there's lots of things in terms of kind of themes that come up, and they all kind of feed back into how they're leading self, how they're leading others, and how they're leading one to one.
One of the things that I hear often, thankfully have friends across the country, and for pain medicine, we tend to be kind of smaller practices, right? I mean, sometimes it's associated with a hospital system, but if it is associated with the hospital systems, the groups themselves tend to be, not overly large, right? I mean, we're generally, for the vast majority of people, probably talking somewhere between 3 and 15 physicians, right? So it's not an overwhelmingly large size group, but we have people that are coming in, and you're coming from maybe a different place, maybe straight out of fellowship, maybe somewhere where you were doing really well, and then you just moved to a new area or for a new opportunity, and they may not be understanding that the frustrations that they're having are based off of some of their potential blind spots, right? Where they're not quite in the space of acknowledging that there is maybe that there is a problem, or that they have some growth to do. That they come in and they're the new cog in the wheel, and they think that, well, this entire room is you guys are all doing it wrong, and it can't be me. I've been great. Like, how would you start the conversation for somebody who hasn't quite understood their blind spots, or has acknowledged that there is growth on their side to be doing?
I mean, honestly, from a coaching perspective, and this week geez, probably had, I don't know, five to 10 coaching sessions with individuals. And the way I start out is I just say, what's on your mind? And so that's where it goes. And so what challenges are you facing? What's going on? And people will start talking about that. They'll talk about how they want to do these things, but these people are kind of blocking them. And so how do they negotiate that? They're talking about things that they'd like to be better at, and that comes up. They're talking about limitations of resources and how to get around that. It just comes from conversations around what is challenging for them, and within those challenges. And this is the thing as we go along. This is kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing. Is I started out in practice, and then there's like some things I was like, this is ridiculous. Why am I doing this? This isn't working out well. And they're like, okay, Winters, why don't you get to this committee? And so then you sit in this committee, and then like now I'm in this space where it's not just what I think, and I'm not writing orders. I'm working with a group of people, and just that environment is so different. And how do I navigate that? And then it gets more and more kind of complex, and you add layers onto it. And so just having a conversation, things come up, and then you focus on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of the areas that I know for myself, as somebody who is not quite a young buck, but still relative. I'd like to think relatively early in my career, and but coming up and having multiple younger physicians that have come and joined our practice after I have, and trying to guide them, right. And you talked really well about the difference between a coach and a mentor,
Yeah.
and I really like your stance on that. But I know that I have found that really challenging, where I think that ability to separate. I think the way that you and maybe I'll stop and give you a chance. Like, let's start there. What's the difference between a coach and a mentor?
Yeah. And so, a mentor is someone who's helping you based on their experience. So they're experts. And so we go to them because they have subject matter experience. They've been there, they've done that. And so when we talk to them, they can be like, "Hey, you might want to consider this. You know, based on what you're saying, this is how I would approach this. If I were you, I'd probably do this and then do this because from what I'm hearing, you're saying you're wanting to do that." Like, and so the mentor really is drawing on their own experience. And what's valuable for you in that is that you get the opportunity to kind of live your life through the expert eyes of someone else. They can give you some input. The problem is they're not you. And you're very different. I mean, you have a very different upbringing. You have very different ideas of what you want to be. You have different kind of things that you're good at and not good at. And so, you know, and so I'm 55, and a medical student comes to me and wants to talk to me about how to get into medical school, right, as a mentor. And you can see like oh well, this is what I would do, and like we're talking a long time, 25, I don't know, 30 years ago. It makes like it's completely different. Or even now, as you go to talk to someone about something that you want to do, or something that you'd like to change, and there are jobs right now that didn't exist a year ago or 2 years ago. And so if you're following the advice of a mentor who is living in the past or living in their own experience, sometimes that doesn't work for us. And so helpful, but yet there's some limitations there. And so how that differs from a coach is, a coach is going to help you see the world through your own eyes. And so the coach is going to help you make sense of these challenges from your own perspective. I like to think about it like adding RAM to a computer. As we're talking about AI right now, it needs a lot of RAM and stuff. And if that RAM isn't there, it just goes very slowly. The coach is able to say, I hear you saying this, and on the other hand, I hear you saying this. How do you put these two things together? What are your thoughts? What might get in your way? What have you seen work? And it's really the coach is maybe has some experience there, but from that experience, they're able to help you ask questions of yourself and open up lines of thinking that you had not thought of before. And so, in general, the mentor is the expert, and they're the expert, and from a coach's perspective, you're the expert. And so how do we extend your expertise in new ways and develop in a way that's really authentic for you? Another key thing for a coach is that they don't have an agenda for you. They're trying to help you be the best you that you want to be, whatever that is.
Got it. I mean, I've heard you talk about it before, but even now, I mean, just the distinction between them is such a it's so interesting to hear, because I mean, I think generally, especially within the medical world, we kind of almost associate those two as very similar, if not synonymous types of things, right? As we're going through our training, my mentor, my attending physician, he's also coaching me along, and she's leading me the right direction. And I think that because of the way that we get trained, I feel like that can be that becomes such a challenge later on in as we try to actually figure out how to separate the two, and how to be a coach looking out for somebody's best
Yeah.
interest, as opposed to being the expert telling them that this is how you take care of patients, or this is what I've seen through caring for this type of patient over the past decade.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting because it can be separate, but I think and even more powerful is how do you bring those two things together? How can you mentor and coach? How can you mentor and teach? How can you coach and teach? And like weave all these different parts together. And so the mentor needs to realize the power, I mean, really the power that they may have in those conversations where individuals are looking. Just as an example, thinking about whether I go academic or community based. Okay, let me talk to my advisor. My advisor's academic based. The advisor's like, well, based on my experience, this is what I would do. I would not do this. And that can really be very powerful for us as we're talking to a mentor to hear what they would not do. And we can start kind of going in that direction if we're not questioning whether this matches like something that's actually authentic for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're mentoring, if I'm mentoring someone, I'm very careful to make sure that I try not to use my experience because I know that that can be a little bit even more persuasive. I try to say what I have seen some people do. On the other hand, I've seen other people do this. And then so you're kind of presenting some options based on your experience that gives someone a broader perspective of how to make sense of this stuff themselves.
That makes total sense. I mean, I think so. One of the things that I know that my specialty has had a tough time doing is adjusting and adapting to, the past of what pain medicine was, the future of
Yeah.
what it's going to be, and how to marry those two, right? One of the things that I hear often from people across the country as they're recruiting, as they're trying to build their teams and serve their communities, we have become, by fellowship standards, a very interventional practice, right? Where the vast majority of fellowship training is focused on all of the new, amazing procedures that we have. And don't get me wrong, they're amazing. I love them. They're
Yeah.
they're fantastic tools to be able to help patients. But there's also a large skill set that many of the fellowships are lacking, might be a little bit strong, but are not covering as well as they did a decade ago when I did fellowship. And specifically thinking about things like medication management, because it has
Yeah.
been such a hot button issue, making such mainstream media news coverage, that I think a lot of places kind of turned away from it, right? And so when I talk to other colleagues that are roughly in my position, where they're trying to help guide and manage some newer folks that they're bringing into their teams, a lot of those conversations are trying to balance the, what does the community ask of us, right? The primary care doctors, the referring physicians that need help trying to care for a certain patient population, that some of them require medication management, and what sometimes just feels better, right? I mean, sticking a needle in somebody and making them feel better is a lot, and for lack of better terms, it's a lot easier
Yeah.
than walking somebody through the journey of, this is appropriate opiate management, this is how we take care of things. And a
Sure.
lot of times we're not doing it. And so I think that's probably the thing that I hear the most is, how do you mentor and coach a younger physician who may not have that experience, who maybe doesn't have the same belief set when it, or understanding of, like, serving the larger community, or serving these, or doing what these primary care doctors want, because of the current framework of something like, the a lot of the academic institutions are mainly focusing on interventions, because it does make it for a much more straightforward training process.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the the arc of kind of growing these leadership skills comes from those sorts of discomforts that occur once you start getting in practice. All of a sudden, you're having to deal with payer mix, which is changing. You're having to deal with patient satisfaction stuff and the different leaders and what they're wanting you to do. You have scarce resources or limited resources. You'd like to have this many rooms, you only have this many rooms. There's competition that's coming in, and they're affecting things in this way. There's another group who's doing these. All of these sorts of things start to come together, and this is outside of you being one to one with a patient. These are these skills that you need to develop, which is figuring out. First of all, it's difficult for you because you're working and you're trying to take care of patients, and at the same time, there's all these things that are going on. Can be a source of burnout, and so how do you make sure that you're staying whole? Second of all, you want to be successful, and so how can you best partner with others and understand what's going on and see the big picture in ways that's going to help you be successful? Those are like key skills.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are, challenges, obviously, that I think everybody faces, period. But obviously within medicine, and as I think, it's, I think one of the funny things is, when you're coming up as a younger person, and you hear these generational conversations, you don't really understand them. And then you spend a decade or two doing things, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, there are these changes that happen, and how do you continue to relate in ways that are effective for both
Right.
the community, the practice, and those different doctors on an individual basis. So if somebody was trying to kind of build these coaching skill sets to be able to lead their communities better, to be able to lead their teams better. I mean, obviously, I know you said, generally starting from a genuine place of curiosity, and asking them questions about the things that are important to them. How would you help to coach somebody who wants to coach their teams to be able to do better?
Yeah, I think so. I think, and specifically, there's kind of two ways of going here. One is how to use this coach-like approach. And that is understand the limits of your expertise and the power of questions and trying to understand what's going on in other people's lives. And so I think just having that as can be helpful to be understanding that part of your value may not be the things you know, but in how you can help others understand what they know. I don't know if that makes sense. Um, but then how do you develop coaching skills? It's reading and practicing, and there's certainly formal education. It could be anything from like CPR or ACLS level coaching to like fellowship level. I went to graduate school for executive coaching, and there's things in between there. I think generally you can find some uh, kind of coaching programs or coaching seminars that can get you started, and then you practice it. It feels very awkward. You keep practicing it and becomes more natural.
When you start practicing the coaching, I mean, is this like, I mean, literally like have somebody watch you talking to
Oh,
other
yeah,
people? Is that kind of how it works, and be like, okay, this is what I'm trying to do.
yeah,
This is what I think I said. And
yeah.
then somebody giving feedback of like, this is actually what I heard or how it came off, to be able to see if that communication is landing in the right way.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's not just with coaching, it's with any of these leadership things. It's any of the things that we do. As we learn some frameworks, it helps us. There is a framework for how you do a block. I mean, you know, like there's steps that go, and then what to do and how to pivot. It's very unnatural to begin with, but then as you learn, you start to get more capable at that. All these leadership things are the same thing. It's knowing the frameworks around how to have these one-to-one conversations, how to lead groups, how to strategize, how to have difficult conversations, those sorts of things. And so for coaching, I think number one is just starting to understand some frameworks. And so a basic thing is when you're talking to someone about a challenge, like you can divide it into two phases. One is problem talk, where we're talking about everything that's happened up to now. So how have things gone? How'd you get here? What have you tried? What have you been doing? And then there's solution talk, so problem to solutions. Now, given these things that you've done, what would you like to do moving forward? How would you approach it? Who would you involve? Like just that framework of problem solution can help you think about, even in a conversation, how you might be approaching someone, so you're not bouncing back and forth. And there's lots of frameworks that start to kind of fit into each other as you develop these coaching skills. Um, and so some of the coaching programs are like I gave a talk at one of the ACGME things where I would teach some stuff, some framework, and then have people coach each other. That's a great way, because you then, how'd that go? What felt comfortable? What felt uncomfortable? What would you like to work on? For if you want to get to become a certified, so there is a kind of a certification, an international certification body called the ICF, and to be able to be certified through them, you have to have 100 hours of training. You have to have, geez, I don't know how many hours of coaching. I think 100 hours of coaching. There's mentor coaching where they're watching you coach in groups. You take a oral exam, you take a written exam, and so it can go up to that level. And then there could be anything in between.
Mm, So for, let's say for the vast majority of healthcare providers that you work with, that through Mayo, I mean, obviously they have, I presume some semblance of access towards you, particularly at the higher ends. But like, as we're thinking about just generally people trying to be able to be leaders in whatever their portion of the world, maybe not at a grand scale, but even on a micro scale, are there certain things that you feel are necessary for all of us to be able to be better at these skills and at this type of communication?
Yeah, I think it's just a thirst for knowledge, honestly. And I think that you start to read things, you start to see that your specialty conferences, there's some talks about that. You start to think about, do you go to a broader course for this? Do a higher level program? I think those are the ways that people mostly get into it. Many organizations have development programs that they bake into it. Many organizations also do not have that. And so, um, I mean, for me, it started out with I was an emergency physician, then I'm doing these committees, and then I became chair of the department. I'm having these conversations with the hospital leadership, and it's like they're talking a different language. And so I decided at that time to get an MBA. As part of the MBA program, that's where I was introduced to coaching. That's how I went and got coaching training. I became president of the medical staff. All these sorts of things started to weave together. It's like it just builds up like that. And I think it's it's best for me to do things when I have a challenge. And so when I'm in a meeting with hospital leadership and I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about, and they don't seem to be getting me, I try to figure out how, like some frameworks, I try to learn how to do it better. And so that's the thread.
Yeah. No, I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, from a kind of practical standpoint, if, we have people that are trying to understand how to build some skill in being able to grow the people around them, right? And
Yeah,
I mean, I think at least, historically, I don't want to say this for all of medicine, but historically, medicine is an achievement field where,
right.
most of you brought up going to conferences. Generally, you go to a conference and people are talking about, oh, I did this, I did that, there's this amazing new thing, we've got all this this stuff. It's not usually about more, what would probably be considered the softer side, and the people skills and the communication,
Yeah,
and how do you grow other people around you. It's more of like, the mentorship side of things, right? I did this, you should figure out how to do this too, so that you can be cool like me. um
yeah,
and so, from a practical standpoint, as we're trying to grow younger physicians that are, or even, more tenured physicians that just want to be better, that want to understand how to help those around them be better, beyond that mentorship side, like, I'm trying to help people to understand maybe some practical kind of first steps of being able to help.
yeah. I mean, that's why I wrote the book, honestly. The book is themes of what I saw in the people that I was coaching, like over and over again. Like there, and so trying to introduce these frameworks and then hoping that people can jump from there. Yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts? What do you think the first steps would be?
Yeah, I mean, I listen to podcasts, and I read books, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's, I created this podcast so that I get to talk to fun people like you and try to learn some new nuggets. And so, I mean, I think, you know, I can only speak from my journey, obviously, and I think, like I was saying earlier, I think that it's been challenging over, a decade now of practice, and trying to bring up other physicians around you, and, first, giving them the ability to understand that it's not competition, right? In which, unfortunately, there's so much competition that goes through medical school, through residency, getting into fellowship, even with fellowship, breaking that air of competitiveness, and helping people to grow into understanding that, we're one team trying to serve a purpose. But I mean, it's, realistically, for it's been a challenge trying to figure out how to provide the right, I don't know, education, information, amount of empathy, for all of the younger docs. And so that's why I think this is such an interesting topic, because, obviously, at a role like you are, within such a tremendous organization, you've, I'm sure, come across, plenty of egos, plenty of
Yeah.
everything, but have been able to help people to figure out how to, at least in some ways, come to the table and, work towards a common goal.
Yeah, and so for leading groups, the way I like to approach it is I like to have groups come with the challenge that they're facing. We need to get patients discharged by noon. We want to create a multi-specialty center of whatever. We want to improve well-being. We want to any of those sorts of things. I think the best way I like to do is have groups bring their problems and then take them through together, them solving those problems, introducing leadership frameworks and things like that. So that's the group leading stuff. From the individual, like coaching one-to-one stuff, I have found the best way is having individuals who are from different places, and so almost like a mutual aid, like where it's nice to have someone who doesn't have any, like there's no tether to you, like you can feel free to speak. There's psychological safety there. Otherwise, it can be difficult within the same group to feel like you can open up, be coached, express some of the feelings that you have. And so I think as you're thinking about like how do you expand some of these skills, you want to make sure that there's psychological safety there. Number one. Number two, understand that people don't have to change if they don't want it to change. And so like we can't like transmit these skills to them. There has to be a desire to there for them to do it. And then also, yeah, finding the right places for that to happen.
I think those are all incredibly well said points, because those all resonate very, very well with me.
Yeah, I mean, right now there's recently a CEO who contacted me, and they have gotten rid of their whole C levels, and what they want to do is have open conversations with their new hires and want to work together. And I'm having conversations with this person about, well, you know what, these individuals may not feel psychologically safe talking to you and opening up to you because you just fired all the previous people. And so how do we like create a realistic approach to working together as a team with high effectiveness?
Oh, that's awesome. I think that's, like I said, I think those final points that you made kind of pull things together for me, and hopefully they did the same thing for our listeners. Dr. Winters, I really do appreciate you spending some time with us. If any of our listeners wanted to contact you or learn more about you, or obviously I'll put links to your book and to some of the places that I've heard you speak before. But what's a good way for people to be able to reach you if, or learn more about the things that you're doing?
Yeah, probably. I mean, the website, richardwinters.com. I probably should be doing more there, but that has a link to the book, and I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter, so you could just kind of look me up there. I've been more of a lurker recently, but I have plans to write a little bit more.
Is there going to be another book in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the next book is really more around these one-to-one conversations because that tends to be difficult.
Yeah,
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 how to coach. I mean, really, it's around that sort of an idea.
yeah. I think one-to-one conversations are probably one of the hardest things as leaders that I can say for myself. That's one of the hardest things that I do, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that feel the same way.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good area to kind of dive deeper into.
Yeah, and it's an area where, as we get good at it, it helps not only the people that we're coaching, but it helps us because it's hard to change ourselves. I'd like to be more fit. I'd like to eat better. I'd like to do like have more time this. I'd like to stop doing that. Like those are all like coaching conversations. How do we have those with ourself?
Yeah, no, I'll be here for it. I'll be waiting for you to release it. All right. Well, Dr. Winters, thank you again. And everybody, please send Dr. Winters some thank yous for being on the podcast. And we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Brian.